This podcast is recorded on the traditional lands of the Kulin Nation. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land and pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. We extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples listening today.
Hello and welcome to Give and Toke Cannabis Conversations, the show that aims to elevate the conversation about cannabis to a higher level. I'm your host Paul, and today we welcome Emily Leung, founder of OHAI and cannabis marketing consultant based out of Vancouver BC. Emily joins us to talk about her work within the Canadian cannabis industry, the successes and challenges for small business in the past 4 years, the story of OHAI, diversity in the cannabis industry, and much more. If you like what you hear, make sure you follow us on your platform of choice and on Instagram at Give and Toke. For now, please enjoy the show. Today, it is my pleasure to welcome Emily Leung, founder of OHAI and cannabis marketing consultant. Welcome, Emily.
Hi, Paul. Thank you for having me.
It's so nice to have you on today, and it's so good to see you again. You're a dear friend from Canada, killing it in the cannabis industry, and it's so nice to have you with us today.
Thank you. Yep, I'm sitting here at home in Vancouver, BC, and we're so blessed to have an extended summer. It hasn't rained too much yet, and we're almost into October.
Those BC summers are something special. They don't last very long, but the length of the days and the things you can fit into those couple of months are very special, and I really do miss it.
Oh, we miss you too. Yeah, we basically just thrive through the rain just for those 8 weeks of sunshine.
It's well worth it.
Hot outside and not be freezing and wet in the cold.
It's well worth it. It's a beautiful place, and I miss it every day. And it's the relationships I made with people like you that made that place so special. So on that note, tell me, what is it that you do in the cannabis space?
Sure. I've been in the cannabis industry for about 6.5 years now. It all started with my own personal connection and experience with the plant. I didn't really dabble into pot until my early 20s. I had taken a couple tokes before. Actually, my very first time was hotboxing my car in high school, Acura and Tegra. No, I did not drive after, but allegedly. Anyway, and then it wasn't until, in my 20s, I was seeing someone. I had a relationship, and he had cannabis in his repertoire, and he was an athlete. And, one day he suggested that I try it on my own because I had just gotten laid off from 3 years of my dream job at an agency, in a marketing agency in Vancouver. And my natural anxiety and insomnia and all this, insecurity was coming up. I mean, as you would as a 27-year-old who's just been laid off. And I was home by myself, and I smoked a joint for the first time. And I wrote like 11 cover letters and just found the spark of creativity. And my experience was this antithesis of what had always been portrayed in cannabis culture and what I had accepted as cannabis experience and culture until that moment, that intimate moment that I had with cannabis. And so my background in branding and marketing, and this is almost 13, 15 years ago, of like content, then made me put these kind of Venn diagram together and found a common place between my career passion of branding and marketing, my own personal passion for introspectivity, spiritual wellness, health and wellness, or physical health and wellness, and then just an emerging market and a fascination with plant. And I think it also helps that ethnically I'm Chinese. I'm Canadian born, Chinese first generation. And there's always been this herbal connection with plant medicine as well. And so in 2016, when I saw that legalization was becoming a more serious conversation in Canada, I started looking it into some more, and I worked at a CPG nutrition company at the time, Vega. And so it was kind of like seeing these parallels of veganism and in pea protein powder and looking at the trends of what cannabis could be in a rec market. And so in 2017, I left my corporate life and decided to just dive into freelancing. I took any contract and work that I could and just started navigating in the cannabis space, and developed a brand called OHAI. And because of my marketing background and connections in Vancouver, friends starting licensed productions and licensing for cultivation and retail, I was able to really shift into a consulting practice and becoming a freelance marketer for a lot of startup, like day one businesses in the Canadian legal framework, specifically in adult rec use. So now it's been about 5 years, and I have OHAI. We have an online shop, and I have been working with some pretty stellar brands over the past few years. But I just recently joined an amazing team based out of Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, called Mother Genetics. We are one of the first genetic and nursery licensed genetics and nursery companies in Canada. And I'm also like thrilled to be in that part of the stage of the supply chain now and really learn about, like, this is even pre-seed, like we provide the cultivars to the market. So that kind of balances out with the lifestyle and creative expression of cannabis in my professional and personal life through OHAI.
Something that you mentioned there, you touched on briefly, was your personal history with it. And that's something that fascinates me so much, because most of us have that experience as teenagers where it's purely recreational. And on the other end of the spectrum is medical. And what I found in Canada was this in-between therapeutic situation where you don't necessarily need to go to a doctor. You're not necessarily doing it to get high. There's this in-between where, in a way, you're self-medicating, which has a bit of a negative connotation at times. But I do think that's something that a lot of us do. Talk to us a little bit more about your personal cannabis experience. Like, dive a little deeper into that, into what you discovered when you were struggling, and it kind of helped you out of that.
Yeah. And, I want to preface by saying that I'm not naive to it being one way or the other of an experience. And I'm not going to say a positive or negative, because I think we can always, if we're using it correctly and being mindful, there's always a positive out of it. To be honest, we can do some reflection, realization. But I think that first year of really experimenting cannabis was, oh wow, like going inwards even more. And I'm naturally very sensitive and introspective, kind of in my head type of person already. So I was going in my head even more. But then there's these moments of clarity. For example, I have really bad shoulder and back pain, and I could feel my body calling to me to go and stretch and do yin and have a bath. And this is again like 10, 15 years ago. I never would have thought I'm going to smoke a joint and take a bath. This is me experimenting with it. And I was like, oh, wow, like that's what it was. And, you touched a good point on self-medicating. We are all patients at the end of the day, because there are benefits to be received and to be absorbed into our ecosystem, our physical and spiritual ecosystem, when we consume this plant. I don't care what anybody says. There's obviously a spectrum of like how much we're using it and the intention of it. Like if you're going hard on the dabs and you just want a good time and knock out, sure. But you're going to wake up feeling refreshed. So, that's still medicine for the soul and the body. But, on that point, that's why I also say, like, what we often forget, and I think don't get talked about often, is that cannabis also emphasizes and elevates. Now, elevate doesn't actually mean elevating happiness. It could also elevate stress, anxiety, insomnia, because there are different properties in each cultivar and product format and who produced it and how it was produced and the timing of it that can affect our body's current state, the homeostasis, right? So sometimes if I'm like super, super, super stressed, I actually really think twice if I really want to smoke a joint, because I don't want my paranoia butterflies to really come out when I'm in a situation. So I may go for something lighter, like a CBD strain, or like an edible, instead of hitting like my dab rig. And so all this has been trial and error, and taking the time to research and being upfront and open and honest with colleagues and friends and learning, so that I can hopefully grasp different anecdotes and research. And, that's the toughest thing. It's been such a prohibited substance plant that it's hasn't had a chance to get a lot of research from the smart people in the world that can really scientifically, medically tell us. I think we are starting to get through and have that breakthrough with science and medicine, especially when more federal legalization happens so that we can bring those minds together and remove political borders to have access to tests and to do research. But until then, we all have to just trial and error it and be as smart as we can about how we do it.
That's great advice. And I think it's important to touch on the fact that, you referred to it as medicine. And even 10 years ago, I would have scoffed at that. I would have gone, medicine, it's just weed. Like, hey, it's a good time, but it's not necessarily medicine. And that's the whole purpose of these conversations, because even people that are involved in the culture still need to change their ideas. And, it's not someone I like to look to too often, but Joe Rogan, of all people, in a podcast, referred to people's challenges with cannabis often relating to because it increases sensitivity. It increases your sensitivity to your body, to your surroundings and things like that. And you touched on the negative elements of that, but increasing your sensitivity can be a really great thing. How am I feeling? What part of my body is aching? What do I need to evaluate through the day? So you do really see that after people get over that maybe desire to get high and have a good time, which there's nothing wrong with, eventually most people do end up in that kind of therapeutic self-medication, sensitive area where they're trying to take care of themselves. So it's great to hear from someone like you who kind of had that teen experience, but then saw a really useful application for it as you were older, and now obviously entering the space, it's something you believe in. So the release of this episode is pretty much around the 4-year anniversary of legalization. Canada has had federal legalization for 4 years. What have you noticed in that time, good and bad? I'm of the believer that it's better to be legal than not, but I also know that there are plenty of challenges and flaws in this industry. What have you noticed over the last 4 years?
I don't think that there should be any reason why we look back to say legalization was a bad idea. I think the Canadian industry has had a really tough time figuring out how to create a seamless and safe and consistent economy because of so many different factors that have been involved. Some of it the government can mandate and control, some of it out of our hands. So I'll touch on the things that are out of our hands. Top of mind, the pandemic. We legalized in October 17, 2018. So that's 4 years. 2.5 of those 4 years of this massive economy and industry nationally has been faced, like many other industry and businesses, against a global pandemic. Supply issues, cost of supplies, morale. The business in itself, which we'll touch on in a minute, is tough game. And, retailers from every level now. One of the beautiful blessings about this is that cannabis was deemed as an essential good. Talk about medicine, right? During the global pandemic. And what an amazing signal to the rest of the world, like literally during a global pandemic, of the benefit of this plant and how important and significant it is, because the government realized, much like liquor stores, unfortunately on the liquor front, that people would get sick and have major mental health implications if their medicine, unfortunately, and sometimes a liquor substance and cannabis was taken away from them. So, that's a huge reflection. On the upside of that is just the resiliency of this industry, because so many of us believe in the good of it and how we can push forward. Now, I've been in it since day one, so I've definitely seen how things have evolved. It's not an easy business. It's not for the faint of heart. I'm a woman of color, and just like many other industries and businesses and roles, there's been experiences that are much less favorable towards me and female colleagues alike, and the queer community as well. Like anyone who's been in a marginalized identity category, it's been real tough on that part too. But when there's darkness, there's light. So something like that causes us women and the queer community to really ally together and become a collective and help each other and look and navigate through that. I've always been a believer that the laws and some of the regulations have been tougher. One of the ones that's talked about the most are the marketing regulations in Canada, how can't have lifestyle merge, we can't glamorize or show vitality and, really push cannabis as a lifestyle, etc. But I think the government will ease into that as we continue to prove that we are a responsible group of professionals who are bringing creativity to the table and finding ways to market and sell this product to consumers in a safe and reliable way. It is only to the government's benefit to do that because they also get a ton of taxes from it. I don't know the numbers, but I know anecdotally that the cannabis industry also helped contribute to our country's economy during this global pandemic, because it was something that we could really continue and thrive forward as businesses. And I think people who have had the unfortunate perspective to step out of the business or maybe take a break, it's good to get a breath of fresh air, but it's just like anything else. We just have to push forward. We're just too ahead of the trailblazing and for the wave to really catch on as a country and as an industry in itself and at a provincial level. Like I live in a suburb of BC in the Lower Mainland, Burnaby, and we don't have a single store. And I think we are the second largest suburb in the Lower Mainland next to Vancouver proper. So, I think, what is it, like 350 something thousand people? I have to go to the neighboring, I have to drive at least 20, 30 minutes. Or now, luckily, we have delivery. So all that's to say, I have good faith in the progress and the evolution of the industry. I'm really looking forward to see how it does evolve, especially organically, and how the pandemic has shifted a lot of perspectives and can support some of the dreams that we have for the industry. An example of that, just to be really clear, is, for example, government didn't allow delivery or curbside pickup for cannabis, but because of the pandemic and it was deemed essential, they allowed retailers to find ways to circumvent that, and it stayed, and cities are now more warmer about having outdoor consumption areas because they're used to people being outside. So I try to look at the glass half full, but there are definitely some hard days, and I'm like, why am I in this business? And then I remember the people, and then I'm like, yeah, it's okay. This is the currency, and the money will come later.
The challenges and stigma, particularly with being a female, having a different cultural background, is something that we will dive into because it deserves its own time. So we will circle back to that. But just mentioning that Burnaby thing, you've got federal legalization. Explain to the listener why you can't get cannabis where you live. What decisions have been made around that?
Yeah, so especially because you're abroad in Australia.
So we're all just thinking that Canada's a utopia. We can just stroll down the street and the streets are flowing with buds. Why can't you get it where you live?
Exactly. So, it's not all rainbows and butterflies here. But it is interesting because I'm from Vancouver, where pot's been around forever. So top of the level, we have legalization, federal legalization of recreational use of cannabis. And then you, as a business, if you're an operator of some sort, you have to apply for a license, whether you're a licensed producer, which we call in short an LP, so you're a cultivator/farmer. There's different licenses for that. And then the obvious next one is being a retailer. So you are the distributor to the consumer, the end distributor to the consumer. The way it works in Canada at the moment is the federal government said, hey, you know what? And it's Health Canada that looks after this, cannabis, and says, we are too big to take care of all this for the whole country. Each province can have its own jurisdiction and their own mandates on how they want to manage the operation, distribution, and selling of cannabis. So the three large markets from west to east, BC, Alberta, and Ontario. I live in BC, and in BC, our retail regulations only allow retail operators to have maximum of 8 stores. The provincial government has then now mandated to a funneled, like lower, not lower in hierarchy, but a smaller government management group. So the municipalities to decide if they will allow cannabis retailed or not. We can still smoke out on the street where you're allowed to have smoke, so away from children, away from parks, and away from the doors. But Burnaby does not have retail. It's up to the city to decide if they want that or not. Now, then that's different in every province. Saskatchewan is one of few, I think it's the only province that is privatized. So they have their own distribution center, whereas in comparison to BC, Alberta, and Ontario, the government, actually, the provincial government is actually the distributor and the wholesaler of cannabis. So if you own a retail, you actually have to order through the government, who manages and decides on inventory. They are the wholesaler. And in BC, the the government is also a direct retailer. I know this is very confusing, convoluted. That's all to say, this can change any day, but this is how it's been set up. And the federal government said, hey, provinces, you take care of it. Provinces have said, cities, you take care of it. And then that's why we all have such different experiences. Now, if you live in Toronto and I'm in Vancouver, because of that system, we have very different, unique product categories to select from, because it depends on the brand's viability and interest in submitting those products into those provinces for commercialization. And so that makes it even a more unique thing, because you could have a brand of edibles in Toronto and tell me and be like, hey, these are amazing. I'd be like, I don't have it in BC. You got to ship it over. So actually that takes me to another point, which is we're allowed to ship and gift legal cannabis or homegrown cannabis across Canada, across provinces. We are allowed to fly domestically, so from province to province to province, with up to 30 grams value added of like dried cannabis, 30 grams of cannabis on us in checked luggage or carry on, even if you are not a Canadian citizen. So if you as an Australian fly from Vancouver to Toronto, you are still flying domestically from within Canadian airports, you can carry and have cannabis on you.
That's amazing. I did once serve a customer who bragged about rolling a joint on a plane. So the future is now. I'm not so sure about the etiquette of that.
That's pretty bold.
Yeah.
You might get some complaints. There's no law against, because he's not consuming it. If he lit up on the plane, that's a whole different story. that would have made headlines for sure. But the big thing is now, like, people also like take that and maybe take it too much to a benefit and think, oh well, I'm just going to drive to Seattle with it. No way. Never ever ever cross any international country borders. And for any American listeners, like, it is a big no-no to cross state lines. I worked in California for a year, and during their first year of legalization, you cannot drive cross state lines with cannabis on you, especially if you're on a federal highway in the US. So, be mindful. But yeah, in Canada, you can fly with pot. And at YVR, there's even signs that says cannabis smoking area, like smoke here. They don't want you to smoke out the door. Is the novelty of it.
Well, obviously, there's some serious challenges to the industry. There's benefits to it existing, and it's such a new one. So you're going to face these challenges. And I'm glad people like you are there who have been around for so long, watching it, working with it, dealing with it. Let's talk about OHAI. OHAI provides some of the best accessories I've seen. I'm a proud owner of the grinder, the papers, the stash jar. I've got quite a bit of OHAI stuff in my collection, and I'm proud to have it. Tell us about the story of OHAI and your elevated essentials.
Sure. So I came up with the name OHAI because I wanted to play on words. You're not in the weed industry if you haven't thrown out at least 100 puns in your repertoire.
Give and take.
Yeah, exactly. And there's, I was inspired by an area in California called OHAI, OJAI, and I'd already been playing around with the word like hi, saying OHAI, and a lot of us will be like, oh, hey, OHAI, right? So that was the name of it, and that's the shell. But the essence and the pulse of the brand is a lot of what I experience in life. I happen to choose cannabis, but ultimately what it is about is empowering people, giving them tools to have confidence. And again, I happen to choose cannabis, but giving folks the empowerment and confidence to explore, experience, consume cannabis. And if you have the tools and the accoutrements to do it, you feel that you've got the strength to actually be supported to dabble in it without the stigma, right? So, I liken it to wine and sex toys. Like with wine, you have the aerators and beautiful special glasses for a different type of red or white. And, once you get really into it, or even if you're not, you want something nice to just enjoy it, right? Sex toys has always been another stigmatized and kind of hush-hush type of industry. But now if you look, there's all sorts of beautiful luxury, high-grade quality toys. And people are like, can't hide this anymore. This is amazing. And oh my gosh, it's like not just going to the corner peep store to buy, a $10, maybe not so good quality silicone thing, right? So I saw this because of my marketing background. I saw what it means to have a brand. I saw what it means to have, marketing that speaks to the truth of a brand. It brings people together. And it's been such an extension of my soul that the bringing of people together initially started with women in business, right? It's like, F you, you don't want me here at this job, you don't like me that I smoke weed, well, watch me and my girls do it. And I started OHAI in 2016, 2017, where the Me Too movement got its peak as well. And so I myself was actually using OHAI's like therapy to be like, okay, if anyone tries to like mess with me, hypothetically, I've now got this like total online girl gang of people, and vice versa. Anyone who's going to get bullied or have something, we will rally together and ally. And then as I've gone through my journey of understanding racism and anti-racism, what it's like to be a true ally, as like, you know, I'm a straight woman, I identify she, her, what it means for a brand like OHAI to show up for the queer community, the trans community, and learning. So it's really now evolved to being queer and BIPOC folks that I want to support. And one of the coolest things was when I first started, I was thinking very feminine and women only, but people like yourself, folks like yourself who are men, straight men, also love it, because they shouldn't also be marginalized or like ignored to have nice things. And so I'm not even talking about the products, because to me the products can be interchangeable. I mean, I love what I've created, and that's always going to be a work in progress and discovery and R&D. But the thing that I try to keep in continuation and the common denominator is when somebody has a piece of OHAI, where as soon as it comes through the door of mail, or they buy it from me at a store, they feel the spark of joy that they did something for themselves, that they can have this pipe and smoke in the bathroom because they're a busy mom, or they had a hell of a day dealing with a boardroom full of men and they just want to have a joint ring and feel bougie when they have their joint. So that's really what I'm trying to create out there, is that lasting memory and this essence of confidence and empowerment.
And I think you're nailing that really well. Like, they are bougie accessories while still being affordable. There is a feminine lean, but they're not exclusively feminine. You know, you pointed out, I don't think I've ever really thought about the fact that there is quite a feminine lean there. And I've got no problem being proud of having that stuff on my stash table and showing other people and having that joint ring. So your vision is coming to life, and they're fantastic products. You obviously mentioned before the pandemic, you've been running a small business in the difficult cannabis space throughout a global pandemic. What have been those challenges for you?
It's actually been the opposite of a challenge, because I was consulting quite heavily and had 3 clients, and I teach. I've taken a break now, but I was teaching digital marketing and had a handful of other projects on the go. And during lockdown life, I was forced to stay put. So I actually launched my online shop on 4/20/2020 because I had the ability to finally finish my website, and I had the ability to set up inventory management and like warehousing and shipping at home, because I wasn't on the road for client work and I wasn't, being too occupied away. So I worked a lot, but that's what I committed myself to during that downtime. And I had no idea what to expect, because it was so bootstrap and grassroots, like very local to Vancouver, because that's where I am, doing workshops with women leading up for a year before a lockdown happened. And that first day I launched, there was like so many orders from people's names I had no idea, never seen before. And I was shook, and I was like, wow, the universe gifted me this opportunity, because everyone's at home and they're like, well, I'm so bored, I'm just going to start smoking more weed inside, and I'm going to try to smoke weed. And now I'm going to have these tools to learn how to smoke weed. And I ended up shifting to online events, online workshops, and there was no physical boundary anymore. People could hop in, people start following on Instagram a little bit more. It's always a constant struggle for me between my freelancing consulting practice, because that's my food, that's my survival. That's also what challenges me for my professional career, and also managing an entrepreneur business. But it actually let me stay put and balance and do both. So, I had a gift out of that time of pandemic, and I'm very grateful for it. And I also design these masks, which, I never would have thought I'd be printing OHAI masks, but they were really sought after. And Vancouver is a small enough city where you can walk down the street and see someone, and people would DM me, be like, hey, I saw this person in the lineup and we locked eyes and we're like, stoner, no stoner, because we're wearing an OHAI mask. And that was like so beautiful. And it really proved to me like, damn, I could sell anything. But it's really, again, that pulse that I'm really trying to convey to people to feel connected.
I remember seeing like in like a style section of a magazine, like someone wearing an OHAI mask. Is that right?
That is correct. There is the actress, I forget her name at the top of my mind, but she plays Betty from the Archie show Riverdale.
Oh, yeah, right. You'll always see people from Riverdale around Vancouver.
Yeah. And so somehow she ended up with a mask, and she got caught by paparazzi in the summer because that was when LA started opening, or the borders opened for actors to come back to Vancouver or like start filming again. And People magazine snapped a picture of her walking her dog in Vancouver with an OHAI mask on. And there's a local cultural paper called the Georgia Straight in Vancouver. It's free. OHAI was mentioned on the cover in the May 2020 edition, just saying how, elevated essentials in cannabis during this time of pandemic. So there's some really, really cool PR that had happened. And I saying it out loud now, I'm still pinching myself like, oh, wow, I can't believe that happened.
I was very stoked when I saw that Georgia Straight in the foyer of my apartment building, seeing someone I know. I'm like, I know her. And
that's right. You saved the copies for me because I was walking down the street from box to box to box looking for it. And because it was still the pandemic, they weren't delivering to the store, so I couldn't find it. And you were such an angel. You said you had them in your apartment foyer, and you saved me a few copies. I remember now.
You've taken good care of me in the past. Well, very interesting story for OHAI. What's next? What's your vision for the continuation of the brand and the OHAI collective, as it were? What's coming next?
So I touched on the soul and the essence of OHAI. So that remains true. How I can express that in a tangible format in the form of products, so then it can make revenue and thrive and build the business. I'm really actually taking a step back to reconsider some of the values. I might be hold on to this like later down the road when somebody listens to this. I've never identified OHAI as an environmentally friendly and a sustainable business. Not to say that I don't consider it. It's just I don't put a stamp out there and say, hey, this is like earth first, because as a bootstrap business and entrepreneur, it's just tough to afford recyclable products and have small footprint. And we're in Canada, I'm in Vancouver, so small city, there's just not a lot of production options. But that's something that's always been nagging at me, and I want to do this planet right. So, I have what I have at the moment in terms of physical products, but I'm really thinking about how I can do better. And I want to make sure like your listeners realize I do think about it a lot. So for example, all the packaging that I produce is meant to be upcycled. So that's meant to be, a joint box with a ring holder. The pipe box that it comes in is meant to be a gift box. You can store your pipe in there for safety. It's meant to be really nice so that you don't want to throw it away, or it's cardboard so you can recycle it. But what does that look like? Do I create more products, or is it more event based now that we know pandemic is over and in-person events can happen again? Is it in the form of technology? I played and dabbled around with those type of concepts. So I'm not really quite sure, but I do want to really focus on helping people and giving them the inspiration, aspiration, and tools to live well, live healthy, and live happy, and just finding balance in their lives and having that moment of that self-spark joy that I mentioned. So I'm not quite sure how that's going to be manifested quite yet out into the world, but that's the message I want to continue to push and convey.
It's a beautiful message, and I really do hope it works out for you. If anyone's going to make it happen, it's you.
I hope so. I'm crossing my fingers.
So before we dive a little bit deeper into kind of women in weed and some of the challenges around that, I want to break things up a little bit with a quick little game here. I'm going to drop some kind of rapid fire questions on you. We've got a 60-second timer. You just do your best to give short, snappy answers. How does that sound?
Sounds good. It sounds a little stressful, but sounds good.
All right, let's do this. Best thing about the cannabis industry?
The people. Most people.
Worst thing about the cannabis industry?
Also the people.
Indica, sativa, or hybrid?
Don't believe in that anymore unless it's from the land directly.
Right on. Flower or edibles?
Flower.
Joints or blunts?
I love a good blunt, but on the daily, it's a joint.
In regards to rap music, East Coast or West Coast?
Ooh, West Coast.
Favorite place to consume?
My couch and bathtub.
Best munchie snack?
Spark food, popcorn, and sparkling water.
Is BC bud the best in the world?
No, but it's the best in Canada.
And lucky last, describe your perfect 420.
Smoking with some of my bestest friends out by the ocean in Vancouver.
Sounds absolutely delightful. Well, even if that was nerve-wracking, I think you did an incredible job of that. Let's move on to women in weed. You've touched on the challenges of being a woman of color, being a woman in general, the kind of need for the industry to do better with BIPOC people in general. In 2017, according to Forbes, 37% of executive roles in the US cannabis industry were women. Today, it's only 22%. So over the last couple of years, we've seen all this conversation about being more inclusive, being more diverse, but we're not necessarily seeing the fruits of that labor on a great scale. But I want to talk to you about that. What have been your personal challenges? What have you seen in this regard?
I think this isn't unique to cannabis. What is unique to cannabis is that this burgeoning industry is starting at a time where equality and diversity and inclusion is ringing on the table and can't be ignored. I'm not saying that it's being achieved. It's just that even if you're, pretending, you still can't ignore it, as a founder and an owner of an organization, because you will get called down. There's going to be accountability for it. So that creates more opportunity to have more conversations and more succession plans, hopefully to have more women involved and at the table and given the microphone when they're at the table. But, again, like what's not unique is the fact that just generally speaking, women haven't had the chance and the opportunity to go to the top and have those C-level leadership skills be transferable to another industry, say in cannabis. So you've never done it before, ultimately an industry and a business still needs to thrive based on merit and credit. Being a woman and being a person of color does not give a hall pass. What it actually means when we talk about the struggle is how much harder oftentimes we have to work to be seen, to be taken seriously, to be considered, to be heard for a role, for a promotion. But if we're not given those opportunities to begin with elsewhere, then we don't have that credibility and that merit to actually do the job, right? So that's the struggle. And what I think isn't talked about is, let's not just look at the leadership and C-level of women. Let's also look at your bud tenders, your store managers, your QA analysts, your lawyers, your accountants. That's still women. That's still women in business. And not all of us actually want to be CEOs, CMOs, or CFOs, We just want to be equally heard at the table and be paid fairly and given an opportunity. I actually do believe that cannabis is trailblazing that because of the timing of this industry. We're still fighting. And I just came back from Toronto from a trade show, back-to-back 3 days. I hung out with all my colleagues who happen to be 99.9% white male, and hell yeah, they support me and they cheer me on. I have to be comfortable with that. I have to be a bro. I have to be able to speak their language. I have to be able to have that boundary of not letting shit, bother me. Because if I don't do that, who else is going to do that so I can follow that example? And that can be really, really tough because we're not used to being in such testosterone-driven, intimate settings and conversations and have that threshold. But luckily for me personally, I grew up with a lot of boys. I have a younger brother and I had 2 boy cousins that came over from after school. My grandma took care of us every single day. So I understand shop talk. I know how to kind of shoot it with the boys a little bit and just walk away and then go hang out with my girlfriends and shop and drink bubbly after, and smoke a joint. But not everyone can do that because that also is a very different social dynamic. So I think there's that career merit and credit part where we've not been given enough opportunity. So it's harder for us to tread through all that. And then there's the other part of it's just a tough world to be socializing with all men all the time. And a lot of us may not be used to it. And that's just on the gender level of being a woman. There's also, like you mentioned, the cultural and the ethnic and, anti-racism part of it. There's also the sexual orientation identification of it, if, of other people of like acknowledging themselves as different, identities, right? So that's just the easiest part for me, being a straight colored woman, to be able to insert myself in those conversations. But this hasn't been done before. So it's really, really hard. You have to be resilient in that and go to bed knowing that you still love yourself and the people that love you to go face it another day.
I mean, in a way, that's kind of heavy. Like, you are doing a lot of heavy lifting in order to play the game there. And I think that's admirable that you're willing to do that work and you understand meeting your audience in a way. But I think, isn't that part of the challenge? That burden is in a way on you to do that work, to be able to be one of the boys, to be able to have that banter. That's still quite a challenge for you to get through. So what have been some of the kind of personal challenges, particularly culturally, I want to talk about here? You identify as Chinese Canadian. What's that been like? You did mention the similarities with plant medicine, and that's a great connection. But I'm sure there's some very traditional values and views about cannabis that aren't quite meshing with where Canada is at.
Definitely. I would say Chinese culture and Asian culture, in a generalization, really don't approve of substance use. There are certain Asian subcultures that like really love the drinking socialization, and a lot of businessmen will go and have drinks after, and that's how they blow off steam. But drugs, anything that is non-alcohol, is kind of deemed as and really frowned upon as a big no-no, very conservative, right? So even though my family is very westernized through immigration and acclimation into the Western culture, that cultural root of like, whoa, inebriation that's not alcohol is very yuck, not good, especially as a woman. And now you want to work in it? Are you selling drugs? So what I did was I really wanted to educate my parents, and I found that parallel through herbal medicine very quickly. One of these little like novelty trivial facts that I love is in Cantonese, the cannabis plant is called Dai Ma. The character Dai means big, and Ma is the one character in Ma Joy, which means anesthesia. So in ancient China, whoever it was that discovered this plant, ancient doctors, found that this big bushy tree, the dye, the big part, can actually provide relief and pain relief and had anesthetic properties. So, it really dates back to China. That's where some of the first cannabis plants were found, in China and India and in the Middle East. So as legalization was starting to happen in Canada, more formal journalistic publications like Maclean's and even Chatelaine, I remember, had talked about cannabis and its therapeutic benefits as medicine and everything else. And so I started forwarding them to my parents, even though they weren't requesting it. I just kept sending it to them. Even if they didn't read it, they could see, wow, Forbes is talking about it, Wall Street Journal is talking about it, Globe and Mail is talking about it, and taking a scientific approach. And, they couldn't deny it. And it was such an interesting shift to see that now that the government deemed it as legal, their mindset also changed. And I ended up living with my parents through pandemic life, and they just gotten so much warmer and accepted the fact of what cannabis is. They see that I'm extremely productive, and they see that I'm still very type A. I wake up, I meditate, I work out, I get my job done, I get my work done, I still socialize. I'm likely some sort of high most of the time when we're together. They don't even notice. And they're like, oh my gosh, you must have eaten some edibles. They're like, you're so funny right now, So it's just like anything else, like similar to how I've developed OHAI. It's just warming them up and having education and information and making people feel more comfortable. The extended part of my family don't really talk or acknowledge or really ask me. They may ask some of my other cousins, like, oh, how's work? What's going on? They might say like, how's business? But they never actually will say cannabis. But that's totally okay. The fact that I'm still part of the family and I'm still invited to dinner is already still good. So I'm not too much of the black sheep being exiled for smoking pot.
A big byproduct of this show is that I want people to hear regular people, or people that, actually not regular people, exceptional people like you, doing great things with cannabis. You know, it is part of your life while still working, maintaining relationships, being, you know, a contributing member of your family and not truly being the lazy black sheep. So it's really nice to hear that people are able to get over that. You know, I think Canada is not a utopia, but it is a place where there's the potential for acceptance to happen a lot quicker, for integration to happen a lot quicker. And I was really pleased to spend the time there in the cannabis industry going, this could be a model for the rest of the world. So obviously you've spoken about some of the challenges there. And you know, I even touched on some of the decline in women's involvement. But what changes are you noticing happening on a whole? You know, is there anyone doing it really, really well? Or are there any promising signs on the horizon? Things that are being put in place to ensure there is diversity of representation in the industry?
I'm starting to see more internal officers that are people of responsibility to make sure there's accountability with inclusion and diversity. I think it's really being driven still grassroots though. There's a collective of women who have gotten together on a WhatsApp group. I think there's close to 300 women on there now. Just basically a massive directory of women of every level and role in cannabis who's invited, open invitation. And so we can't leave it up to the board members and the boardroom anymore. We have to take that control ourselves and keep supporting each other and finding really effective and genuine, authentic ways to become allies for each other as well. That type of programming isn't there, but because of survival and out of desperation, we're just tired of having to fight and feel like we're not winning. We're just putting our efforts together. So it's really driven by a community of advocates, and it's a really beautiful byproduct of the situation.
So again, the kind of burden has been put on you guys to do the work, but I mean, I can't imagine a better group of people more willing to do the work. It's just a shame that it's been spoken about so much, yet you're still required to do the heavy lifting.
Yeah. I mean, it's not too dissimilar from like anti-racism, right? Like, why is it up to the color folks to have to explain why microaggression exists or why it feels that way, right? But it has to start somewhere. And I've always been on the boat of like, just like the marketing regs, hey, I can either sit here and complain and whine about it, or I can do something about it. And along the way, we'll sweep up others who are non-female who will come and support. And, you know, those are the men that I call my weed bros. They're the ones that cheer me on and make sure like, yo, you have a right to do this, like, and give me that vote of confidence, especially coming from a man who's like, no, like, you know, F them, like, you got this, you know? And so that slowly creates the allyship, and we just have to start from somewhere. And it's hard to be optimistic because there's some really, really hard days and exhausting days, but this is the hard work that has to be done, and it will pay off. I truly believe it.
Well, that's very inspiring. And I think it's great for people to hear you have that enthusiasm and that willingness, because it's important work that needs to be done. And ultimately, the gatekeeping white dudes that think that weed is just for them aren't going to be the ones to do the work, even though some of them are in charge.
Exactly. And, you know, it'll catch up. It'll catch up because they just don't have a choice. But even I say, like, okay, even if they pretend that they want to hire a woman, at least they're pretending, at least they're open to it versus than not. We just have to start somewhere.
I think I certainly noticed that with kind of sustainability and renewable energy. There's a lot of people who are resistant to change because it's not going to be perfect straight away. You know, we're not going to nail it. Solar panels aren't completely efficient. You know, we need something to replace the mining jobs. But it's like, yeah, so let's start the work now rather than go, oh, it's too hard. You know, this isn't going to happen for 50 years. It's not my job. So good on you for having that enthusiasm despite the challenges.
Yeah. I mean, like, the thing is, there are so many smart people, folks. Like, it doesn't matter what your background is. If we remove all of that, the reason why we exist in this business is to make money, like, plain and simple. We want to be a successful business. And in order to do that, you need cash. So if someone who is smart as hell and has had cannabis experience and can find ways for your operation to save money and make more money, are you really, really going to care that person is a colored trans woman? Like, come on. really, then that's just your own shortfall, and you're just not going to succeed in a business in 2022. It's just not going to happen. Like, that's just your own fault then. You know what I mean? Like, you're now discrediting someone who's really smart. And I've seen it happen. I've seen the bro zone go in circle, and I'm like, oh, there goes another C-level exchanging for another C-level. Okay, how are their sales going? No, because they're just nepotism and like hiring each other and their friends. And they're like, oh, this industry is so tough. No one's making money. Maybe you should just look inwards and see what's going on with your business.
Well, one of the things I like to do as we head towards the end of the show is a segment called Polls of Wisdom. And this is an opportunity to drop a bit of a kind of snappy dinner party fact that can kind of change someone's mind about cannabis. So, you're at dinner, you're at a family barbecue, and someone goes, oh, I hear that cannabis just makes you sleepy all the time. Or, aren't you just stoners for doing that? What's something you might drop on them to change their mind?
Well, I'm borrowing this from mainly Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind, because he said it so well. It's low and slow and set and setting. The low and slow, even for myself, like, okay, am I smoking a whole blunt today right now? How much water did I have? How much sleep did I have? What's my stress level like? What kind of day did I have, right? What have I eaten in my tummy? So low and slow always. And then set and setting is really the mindful and intentional awareness of consuming. I still sometimes won't smoke, even if I'm with my colleagues at a pot conference, because I'm there for work. I want to be my best. And sometimes taking a little puff will make me be my best, but I really think about my environment. Or is my social anxiety going to really creep out in front of my CEO and I'm going to embarrass myself because I just smoked his dab? Because that's happened before too. I actually fainted. So that wasn't a good look. Okay, sidebar. So I was in California and I hit the Puffco and I took a dab, and then I just came out of like this intense meditation retreat. So, I'd been eating super clean and kind of had tolerance break from anything and everything. Took one hit of the Puffco and I popped over in the restaurant, and it was 6 white men and me on 5'5" Chinese woman in middle of nowhere, like desert California. They carried me to the Sprinter van. People are like, oh my God. And luckily I kind of came to them like, I'm okay, don't call the ambulance. Gave me some Coke, like Coca-Cola, pop soda. And then I kind of came to with the sugar, went back to the restaurant. I had to tell the service staff, like, no, these guys are good. I'm not being managed or kidnapped here. But that's so setting, everybody. Learn from my lesson. I don't care how pro you are. The more pro you are is just being aware of your surroundings, Yeah,
it's not necessarily a tolerance thing, is it? It's an evaluation thing.
Yeah.
Your professionalism with weed.
Yeah.
That's great advice. And that low and slow thing is something that every bud tender should be saying to newcomers. But set and setting, I hadn't really thought about that. That is really, really important. So that's incredible advice. I am so grateful for your knowledge, your spiritual connection with the plant, your insights into business, and just your positivity in general. Having someone like you on the show to share your story and share your insights and share your relationship with cannabis goes well beyond anything I can explain. So I'm so, so grateful for your time today. Where can our listeners find you on the internet? What should they be looking up?
Yeah, so OHAI is spelled OHAI, and it's OHAI, not OHAI. And the website is OHAI Life, OHAILIFE.com. That's where you can find more information about me and the brand, and that's where you can shop. I currently ship to US and Canada and international. I've had a couple of international orders, or you can follow us on Instagram. I say us, but really it's actually just me. So I just like to say us because then optically it sounds bigger.
It's way more professional. I've been saying us on this show. So yeah, I feel you.
Yeah, exactly. You get me. So you can DM us on Instagram, also OHAI Life. And, if you're looking for something and you think the shipping is too astronomical, just message me, and it's me behind all the messaging and the keyboard. So happy to help anybody if they're looking for some goodies.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I think we could talk for hours and hours, and perhaps that's just a good prompt for us to do this again sometime. But Emily Leung from OHAI, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. It's been incredible.
Thank you so much, Paul. It's been an honor and a pleasure.
Give and Toke Cannabis Conversations is written and produced by me, Paul. Music written, produced, and performed by Big Mike. Follow us on Instagram @GiveandToke, or get in touch by emailing giveandtoke@gmail.com. You'll also find us on both Twitter and Facebook. All opinions expressed by program guests are solely their current opinions and do not necessarily reflect the position of Give and Toke. Content discussed in this show does not constitute medical advice. Cannabis is not legal everywhere, so please be aware of local laws.